In 2013, a movie made like over $640 million at the box office, but its director called the whole experience of making it, quote, wrenching.
Yeah, and its main villain was entirely erased in pre-production just because boys don't buy female action figures.
Right. So welcome to the deep dive. We have a massive stack of sources today covering the behind-the-scenes reality of Marvel Studios' Thor: The Dark World.
And our mission today isn't just to recap a superhero movie. We really want to explore the fascinating, messy, and highly corporate creative process behind this film.
Exactly. We want to extract the mechanics of how a mega blockbuster is actually built because, I mean, it's just such an interesting case study for you to hear about.
It really is. It is the ultimate case study in the duality of modern franchise filmmaking. Because when you look at the raw data, this film was an undeniable financial triumph. I mean, it was the 10th highest grossing film of its release year.
That's a huge hit by any metric.
Right. But critically, it was a profound struggle. Until the release of Eternals years later, this film sat squarely at the absolute bottom of Rotten Tomatoes for the entire Marvel Cinematic Universe.
Okay, let's unpack this because a disconnect of that magnitude doesn't just happen by accident. You don't make over $500 million while simultaneously being viewed by critics and fans as a massive creative stumble without some severe turbulence behind the curtain.
Yeah, totally.
So what is the fundamental disconnect between the financial spreadsheet and the final cut we saw on screen?
Well, to answer that, we really have to look at the volatility of the foundational vision. Like, the tone of the Dark World feels radically different from the first Thor film.
Completely different.
And that is a direct result of an intense game of musical chairs in the director's seat.
Yeah, we should definitely establish the timeline there. So Kenneth Branagh directed the first film, right? And he leaned heavily into that theatrical Shakespearean family drama.
Exactly.
And Marvel wanted him to stay on for the sequel, but Branagh just walked away.
He did. The sources note he cited his, quote, Irish superstitious blood, meaning he basically refused to assume a sequel was a guaranteed success before the first movie even hit theaters.
Which is pretty fair.
Right. But more practically, the Marvel production timeline was just way too fast. He needed to breathe, and the studio was already looking to plant a flag for a sequel release date.
So the chair is empty, and Marvel then pivots and brings in Patty Jenkins.
Yes. And this is where the creative trajectory takes its first really sharp turn. Jenkins was coming off the acclaimed film Monster, and she pitched a highly specific, character-driven concept.
Which sounds awesome, honestly.
It does. She wanted to frame the sequel as a Romeo and Juliet story.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, the narrative would have focused on Jane Foster being stranded on Earth, with Odin deliberately manipulating the villain, Malekith, just to keep Thor away from her.
Oh, I see.
So it was a story anchored entirely in romance and familial betrayal, rather than, cosmic explosions.
I can totally see how that works on paper. It uses the intergalactic setting to heighten a very grounded, relatable human conflict. But she didn't stay either.
No, she departed in December of 2011. The public statement was, as always, creative differences.
Mm-hmm.
But the underlying reality is a fascinating look at the pressures of the industry.
Oh, definitely.
Jenkins realized she just couldn't make a good movie out of the specific action-heavy story Marvel ultimately decided they wanted to tell.
Because it wasn't her vision anymore.
Exactly. She knew that if she compromised her vision to make their movie, and it failed, well, her name would be on it.
Yeah.
She would bear the blame as the director.
Right, right.
And in Hollywood, taking the fall for a massive studio failure can literally end a career. So she basically opted for self-preservation.
Which makes total sense. But that leaves the studio with a rapidly approaching release date and no captain. Enter Alan Taylor.
Yep.
And he wasn't hired for a Shakespearean background or a romantic vision. He was brought in primarily because of his work directing episodes of HBO's Game of Thrones.
Right, which was huge at the time.
Huge. And Marvel Studios president Kevin Feige gave him a very specific mandate. He wanted Taylor to add layers of patina, of texture, of reality to the golden realm of Asgard.
They wanted that gritty, dirt under the fingernails, Viking aesthetic.
Yeah.
If you connect this to the bigger picture, it perfectly encapsulates the ongoing struggle between auteur filmmaking and franchise machinery.
Right.
Like an auteur comes in with a singular vision like Jenkins' Romeo and Juliet pitch.
Yeah.
But a franchise requires the film to fit into a pre-existing, interconnected pipeline.
It has to look like the rest of the universe.
Exactly. The studio needs the movie to serve the broader aesthetic, which often means sacrificing idiosyncrasy for uniformity. They wanted Taylor to ground the fantasy in a very specific terrestrial grit.
It's like building a house. It's like starting with an architect who designs a Shakespearean theater
Yeah.
and then handing the blueprints to someone who wants to build a romantic balcony.
Right, right.
And finally, giving the tools to a general who just wants to build a gritty Viking fortress. Like, hold on. I have to challenge the logic of that mandate for a second. We are talking about a universe featuring space gods, magic hammers, and rainbow bridges.
Yes, we are.
Isn't trying to force a gritty, mud-covered Game of Thrones aesthetic onto that specific mythology a fundamental misunderstanding of the source material?
You think so, yeah.
It feels less like building a cohesive world and more like an automotive assembly line. It's as if Jenkins wanted to build a sleek sports car she leaves, and the studio hands that half-built chassis to Taylor and says, turn this into a military tank, but keep the sports car engine. You end up with a vehicle that doesn't handle well on any terrain.
That assembly line metaphor is highly accurate, especially when you consider how the studio handled the engine in your analogy, which is the script itself.
Right.
The clash of visions wasn't just happening in the director's chair. It was being dictated at the corporate level, particularly regarding the film's villains.
So let's follow that thread. If the director is swapping out the chassis, what is the corporate side doing to the script? Because the antagonist is the central driving force of any superhero movie. And our sources show that an early version of the script featured Gila as the primary villain.
She would have been the overarching antagonist, yes. But Gila was entirely scrapped by the Marvel Entertainment Creative Committee.
Why?
Well, to understand this, you have to look at the corporate structure of Marvel at the time. The New York office, which was led by executives rooted heavily in the legacy comic book and toy industries, held massive sway over the film studio.
Oh, the toy industry. Okay.
Producer Craig Kyle actually revealed that the New York office outright forbade the studio from using Gila because of a rigid retail metric. To quote Kyle directly, boys don't buy female action figures.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Wait, so the entire narrative trajectory of a multi-million-dollar film, the emotional stakes, the thematic core of the hero's journey, was altered entirely because of legacy retail assumptions. You're telling me how much of the plot was actually character-driven versus product-driven? Was it essentially dictated by the molding costs of plastic in a toy factory?
It is a stark reminder that at this tier of blockbuster filmmaking, art is completely subordinate to commerce. The merchandising data literally forced a total rewrite of the antagonistic force.
That is wild.
Because the toy division rejected Hela, the studio pivoted to Malekith the Accursed, the ruler of the Dark Elves, played by Christopher Eccleston. And this boardroom mandate placed a grueling physical burden on the actors who were brought in to execute it.
Grueling is an understatement, honestly. Eccleston spent 6 hours in the makeup chair every single day just to become Malekith.
6 hours.
And he wasn't just wearing heavy prosthetics, he had to learn an entirely invented Elvish language.
Right.
The linguist based it heavily on Finnish, which has incredibly complex syllables and vowel harmony. He had to deliver those lines naturally while acting through thick layers of silicone.
I mean, we also have to acknowledge his co-star, Adwal Akinwumi Egbe.
Oh yeah, who played Algrim or Curse?
Yes. His daily transformation required a 40-pound practical suit layered over 3 hours of makeup. He described the character's physicality as a hybrid of a bull and a lava creature.
A bull and a lava creature? Wow.
These were deeply committed, physically punishing performances meant to ground the fantasy in tangible reality.
And Eccleston really dug into the psychology of it. Like, he didn't play Malekith as a mustache-twirling cartoon. He approached the character as a tragic figure. A leader who had lost his wife, his children, and his entire race to the Asgardians.
He had a real motivation.
He was driven by pure, agonizing grief. He even cited a proverb during production about digging 2 graves when seeking revenge. He found the human motive inside the mandated cinematic evil.
Which makes the final cut of the film incredibly frustrating from a narrative perspective.
Why? What happened?
Despite Eccleston's psychological preparation and physical endurance, director Alan Taylor admitted he had to cut the vast majority of Malekith's backstory in post-production. The studio priority was to make the movie more, quote, efficient.
Wait. They gutted the villain's fundamental motivation for the sake of pacing?
Yes, they did. The Marvel process demands a certain rhythmic momentum to keep mass audiences engaged. Extended scenes of a villain mourning his dead family, well, they slow that momentum down.
I guess so, but still.
So the nuance was removed. The audience never sees the depths of Malekith's loss. Consequently, critics heavily penalized the film for having a hollow, generic villain entirely unaware that a rich, complex backstory was just left on the cutting room floor to meet a mandated runtime.
So let me get this straight. We have a greedy, television-inspired aesthetic forced onto cosmic gods, and a villain chosen by the toy department whose emotional motivations were erased for speed.
That's the summary.
Yeah. But they still had to actually shoot the movie. How did they execute Taylor's demand for physical realism when dealing with a plot about magical elves and interdimensional portals?
Well, to their credit, the production team went to extraordinary lengths to achieve that grounded, tactile aesthetic Taylor was hired for. They actively avoided the trap of just building sound stages in Hollywood and painting them green.
They actually went on location.
Right. To represent the desolate, ruined Dark Elf homeworld of Svartalfheim, they transported the crew to real, harsh, volcanic environments in Iceland, specifically locations like Dómadalar and Skogafoss.
And cinematographer Kramer Morgenthau really wanted to establish a boots-on-the-ground feeling there. And he made a very specific technical choice to capture that dirt and grit.
He did.
He shot the film digitally using the Arri Alexa Plus camera, but he paired it with Panavision anamorphic lenses. He said those lenses brought, quote, the magic and mystery of photochemical back to digital.
And that is a crucial technical distinction. An anamorphic lens doesn't function like a standard spherical lens. It physically squeezes a wider field of view onto the camera's sensor.
Okay.
When that compressed image is stretched back out for projection, it introduces very distinct optical characteristics.
Like those horizontal lens flares and the oval-shaped background blur, right?
Exactly, those elements. But more importantly, an anamorphic lens introduces organic, analog imperfections.
That's what?
Like a slight softness at the edges of the frame, a subtle distortion. Early digital cameras are often criticized for being too clinical, too razor-sharp and cold.
Right, they look too perfect.
Exactly. By placing vintage anamorphic glass in front of a modern digital sensor, Morgenthau was essentially adding optical dirt to the image, softening the harshness and giving it the epic, mystical texture of classic, big-budget cinema.
They were intentionally degrading the digital perfection to match the literal dirt Taylor wanted on Asgard's boots. That makes total sense.
Yeah, it was a very smart move.
And we see that same commitment to physical weight in how they rendered Asgard itself. Instead of rendering a shiny, computer-generated utopia from scratch, camera crews flew helicopters over the coast of Norway, specifically the Lofoten Islands, capturing 6 hours of real landscape footage.
And they used those real places as the foundation. The visual effects studio, double negative, then embedded the computer-generated architecture directly into those very real, jagged Norwegian cliffs.
Wow.
It reinforced Taylor's mandate that this planet of the gods had to feel like a place with actual topography, weather, and geography.
But they needed all the visual tricks they could get for the climax, because the final battle isn't just a physical brawl. It takes place across multiple dimensions simultaneously due to a cosmic event called the Convergence.
Right, things get crazy.
You have characters throwing punches in London, falling through a portal into Svartalfheim, and getting knocked back out somewhere else entirely. And the visual effects supervisor, Jake Morrison, came up with a mechanical concept for these portals that he called time toffee.
Time toffee is such a brilliant descriptor for the visual physics they established.
Mm-hmm.
Morrison designed the portals not as clean, instantaneous doorways that you just step through, but as a thick, gelatinous membrane.
Oh, that's so cool.
When a character passes through, the portal bends, stretches like cling film, violently rips, and then spits the mass out on the other side.
I love the mechanics of this so much. It's like trying to win a fist fight while being repeatedly shoved through a thick wall of jello.
Yes.
It adds incredible friction and physical resistance to a concept that is entirely computer-generated.
And critically, it maintains the kinetic energy of the sequence. If a portal is just a clean visual cut from one location to another, the momentum of the action stops dead.
You lose all the energy.
Exactly. The time toffee membrane ensures the characters have to physically push through reality itself, meaning they keep swinging and struggling, even as space and time warp around them. It is a highly effective way to marry the fantastical sci-fi elements with the heavy physical weight Alan Taylor demanded of the action.
But of course, all of that carefully planned kinetic energy hits a brick wall once production wraps and they enter the editing room. This brings us to post-production, where the director's hard-fought, on-set vision violently collides with the reality of audience testing and studio intervention.
Post-production on a Marvel film is not just about trimming scenes. It is a period of aggressive rewriting and reshooting, known internally as the Marvel process.
The famous Marvel process.
And the Dark World experienced the blunt force of this process. For instance, during the edit, the studio realized that Tom Hiddleston's performance as Loki was undeniably the strongest element of the footage. It was working incredibly well.
Naturally.
So Alan Taylor had to go back and shoot entirely new, full scenes just to inject more Loki into the connective tissue of the narrative.
But the alterations to Loki went way beyond just padding his screen time. Originally, Loki was supposed to permanently die in this film.
That was the plan, yeah.
That was the intended emotional conclusion to his character arc. But when they put the rough cut in front of test audiences, the audience outright refused to believe he was actually dead.
The audience's meta-knowledge of the character's history of deception completely overwrote the scripted narrative.
That is hilarious.
The disbelief in the screening rooms was so pervasive that it forced Marvel Studios to completely alter the climax of the film in post-production. They engineered a new ending, revealing that Loki had faked his death and was secretly sitting on the throne of Asgard, impersonating Odin.
So the audience essentially bullied the studio into a resurrection.
Basically, yeah.
But the script issues didn't stop at the ending. Our sources detail a moment during the London shoots that sounds like absolute logistical chaos. They had 3 major scenes that simply were not working on the page. The dialogue was flat. The transitions didn't make sense.
They were in trouble.
So they called in Joss Whedon, who had just directed The Avengers. Alan Taylor described it as Whedon being, quote, airlifted in, like a SWAT team.
A literal script SWAT team.
Whedon landed, rewrote a broken scene to fix the exposition, and literally, as he was heading back to his plane, Taylor grabbed him and begged him to fix 2 more scenes on the fly.
What a script doctor like Whedon does in that scenario is look for the path of least resistance to fix a broken emotional beat. Taylor had all this muddy, Viking-inspired footage, but it lacked the specific, snappy character chemistry that Marvel audiences expected.
Right.
Whedon's job was to inject just enough banter and clear motivation into the dialogue to bridge the gap between Taylor's gritty visuals and the studio's mandated plot points. It is a staggering level of corporate intervention.
So what does this all mean? If a movie requires a SWAT team of outside writers to fix your dialogue on the runway, and your test audiences are dictating whether a main character lives or dies, whose movie is this really? Is it the director's, or is it just a studio product assembled by committee?
This raises an important question, and Alan Taylor's own reflections answer that. He later called the entire experience particularly wrenching. He stated plainly that the studio substantially altered the film from his original vision inside the editing room. He believed his initial cut possessed a sense of childlike wonder and a magical quality, which was systematically inverted and stripped away during the reshoots to fit the house style.
That's pretty sad, actually.
It is. The Marvel process, the constant testing, the boardroom mandates, the airlifted writers, is a mechanism designed to guarantee a baseline of commercial success. And it worked.
$500 million, yeah?
But it is a system built on consensus, and consensus is often the enemy of idiosyncratic, singular art.
Which brings us right back to you listening to this right now. Whether you are managing a complex project at your job, trying to create art with a group, or just navigating a messy team environment, Thor: The Dark World is an incredibly potent case study in the nature of compromise.
Absolutely.
It is a glaring look at what happens when an individual's creative vision runs headfirst into an immovable corporate strategy. Sometimes that corporate SWAT team saves a chaotic project from going completely off the rails, and sometimes it breaks a creator's heart in the process.
It is a brutal balancing act. And there's one final detail from our sources that perfectly encapsulates this reality. Consider the mid-credits scene of this film. The sequence that introduces Benicio del Toro as the Collector.
Right, the scene where they hand off the Aether.
Precisely. During all of this chaotic post-production, while Alan Taylor is exhausted, watching his gritty fantasy being recut, tested, and rewritten to fit a corporate mold, he wasn't even the one who directed that final scene.
Wait, really? Who did?
That scene was directed by James Gunn, who was already deep in pre-production for Guardians of the Galaxy.
Oh, wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah. Think about the mechanics of that. While one director is wrestling with the painful compromises of the current product, the studio machinery has already brought in the next director to shoot footage setting up the next product.
It never stops.
It forces us to ask a difficult question about the modern era of interconnected mega franchises. Are these individual movies even meant to stand alone as complete, satisfying stories anymore? Or are they ultimately just very expensive bridges to the next advertisement?